Robert Conrad, famous, fearless, trapped. The man America refused to set free. The photograph nobody talks about. There is a photograph taken in 1952 that most people have never seen. A young man, 19 years old, standing on a loading dock in Chicago. His shirt is open at the collar. His hands are calloused. He is squinting into the sun. He looks like a man who has already decided that the world owes him nothing and he will take everything anyway. His name, at that moment, is Conrad Robert Falk. He is making $1.87 an hour, $74.40 a week. He has lied about his age to get this job. He has been working since he was 15 years old. He has a young wife at home who is expecting their first child. He has no high school diploma. He has no plan. He has nothing except a face that stops people in the street and a body built by years of lifting things heavier than he should have. 12 years later, that same man will be the highest-rated television star in America. 20 years after that photograph, he will be in a courtroom in California, convicted of driving under the. And 30 years after that, he will die in his sleep at the age of 84, leaving behind a career that spanned 6 decades, a legacy that the entertainment world called legendary, and a question that nobody ever thought to ask. Who was Robert Conrad when the cameras were off? Not the character, not the persona, not the man who insisted on doing his own stunts while producers begged him to stop, not the man with 4 professional boxing victories and 0 losses. The man underneath all of that. The choir singer. The father who married young and meant it. The actor who put on a suit and went to a network audition and said, quietly, that he thought he could be more than what people expected of him. That man. Who was he? And what did it cost him to spend 50 years being someone else? The machine that built him. Before we can understand Robert Conrad, we need to understand the world that made him. 1960. America is afraid. The Soviet Union has nuclear weapons. The Berlin Wall goes up in 1961. President Kennedy is assassinated in 1963. Cities are burning. The old order is being questioned from every direction. And in the middle of all that fear and uncertainty, the American television network needs something very specific. Not complexity, not nuance, not a man who reads poetry or sings in church on Sunday. They need a man who does not flinch. CBS is building a television empire in the mid-1960s. They need content. Not 1 episode per season, not a film every 2 years. 1 episode every single week. 52 weeks a year. Action scenes in every episode. Stunts that make the audience's hearts stop. And a lead actor whose face makes women lean toward the screen, and whose physicality makes men sit up straight. Robert Conrad walked into that machine in 1965 and signed on to play James West in Wild Wild West. The show was a Western adventure series set in the 1870s, combining the elegance of a secret agent story with the raw physicality of frontier America. Conrad was at the center of every scene that mattered. The producers knew within the first month of filming that they had found something rare. Conrad did not just perform the action sequences. He invented them. He choreographed them. He insisted on executing them himself, without a stuntman, without a safety net, without complaint. The producers were thrilled. And they were terrified, because they understood something that Conrad, at 30 years old, did not yet fully understand. When you find a machine that works this perfectly, you run it until it breaks. And they ran him. The boy on the dock. But we cannot start the story in 1965. We have to go back further. Because the man who walked onto that CBS soundstage was not born there. He was built, slowly, painfully, by a life that left him very few options. Chicago, 1935. Conrad Robert Falk is born on March 1st. His father, Leonard Henry Falk, is 17 years old. His mother, Alice Jacqueline Hartman, is 15. They are children raising a child. There's no stability to speak of, no anchor, no map. What there is survival. Conrad drops out of school at 15. He is not a troubled kid in the way the newspapers would later try to make him. He is practical. The family needs money. He can earn it. So he does. The Chicago loading docks in the early 1950s are not gentle places. The men who work them are large and unforgiving. They do not respect youth. They do not make room for weakness. And they absolutely do not tolerate a boy who told the recruiter he was 21 when he was, in fact, 15. But Conrad holds his own, because Conrad always held his own. He tells the recruiter he is 21. He gets the job. He lifts things that are too heavy. He does not ask for help. And somewhere in those years on the dock, something gets reinforced in him. A belief, a rule of survival. The only person you can depend on is yourself. And the only way to earn respect is to never, under any circumstances, show that something is too much for you. That rule will serve him well for the next 30 years. It will cost him everything in the end. At 17, Conrad meets Joan Kenley. He is smitten in the immediate, absolute way that young men sometimes fall. He does not wait. He does not ask permission. He takes her away from a faith-based boarding school. They run together. They hide from both sets of parents. They live under a name he chooses himself, Robert Conrad. Think about that for a moment. A 17-year-old boy on the run decides to rename himself. Not for Hollywood, not for a publicist, simply because he needs to disappear. Because the world he came from is one he has decided to leave behind completely. Conrad Robert Falk disappears that year. Robert Conrad is born. And the new name carries a kind of promise to himself that he will be whoever he decides to be, that no one will tell him who he is, that he will build himself from scratch on his own terms or not at all. It is a beautiful idea, and it is also the beginning of a trap. Because when you build yourself entirely from will and performance, you eventually stop knowing where the performance ends and the person begins. 178 episodes. Wild Wild West premieres on CBS on September 17, 1965. It runs for 4 seasons and 104 episodes until 1969. Robert Conrad is 30 years old when it begins, 34 when it ends. In those 4 years, he performs stunts that the show's insurance carriers repeatedly beg him to stop. During the filming of one particular episode, Conrad executes a stunt involving a platform. He misjudges the edge. He falls 12 feet down to a concrete floor, landing on his head. The production shuts down for nearly 3 months while he recovers. When he comes back, the producers sit him down. They explain the financial risk. They explain what happens if he is seriously injured. They explain that there are professional stunt performers who are trained specifically for this work and who are very good at it. Conrad listens. He nods. And then he goes back to doing his own stunts. There is a version of this story where we call that dedication, where we say he was an artist committed to authenticity, where we honor the discipline and the toughness and the refusal to take shortcuts. And that version is partly true. But there is another version, a quieter version that the admiring press never wrote. What if the inability to let someone else do the dangerous work was not strength? What if it was a man who had never learned that asking for help was permitted? A man who, at 17, lifted things on a dock that were too heavy for him and didn't stop. A man whose entire identity was constructed on the foundation of never being the one who couldn't handle it. Conrad did not just perform those stunts for the audience. He performed them for the rule he had made himself as a boy. Never show that something is too much for you. The audience saw a superhero. What they were actually watching was a man proving something to himself, over and over again, 178 times. The Man in the Suit, 1971. Wild Wild West has been canceled. The reason, officially, is pressure from parent groups who felt the show was too violent for the Saturday evening time slot. After 4 seasons of being the most kinetic, physically demanding show on American television, the network pulls the plug. Conrad is 36 years old. He is still in excellent physical condition. His name is still known in every household in America. And he wants something that no one is prepared to give him. He wants to play a lawyer. The DA is a Jack Webb production. Conrad is cast as District Attorney Paul Ryan. He appears on Adam 12 in crossover episodes to build anticipation. He sits down with journalists and says earnestly and without irony that wearing a suit makes him feel capable. Like a barrister, he says. He predicts the show will run 4 years. He says it will be a big hit. He says audiences are ready for something different from him. He is wrong about all of it. The DA is canceled after 1 season. Now, the easy version of this story, the version the entertainment press told at the time, is that Conrad's ego wrote a check his talent couldn't cash, that he overestimated his appeal, that he was too full of himself to see the reality clearly. But that is not actually what happened. What happened is more interesting and considerably sadder. The audience watched Conrad in his suit, sitting behind a desk, speaking calmly about legal procedure, and they felt cheated. Not because he performed badly, but because they had spent 6 years watching him fall from platforms and throw punches and move through action sequences with the controlled aggression of someone who has nothing to prove and everything to give. They had decided who he was, and they were not interested in revision. Conrad himself understood this. In interviews after the cancellation, he was surprisingly self-aware about it. He said that everywhere he went, people expected to see him in action. They saw the character when they looked at him, not the man. He said that sometimes this expectation turned negative, that he was regularly approached by people looking for a confrontation, wanting to test whether the man matched the myth. He said he had learned to live with the abusive words, until the situation in Fort Lauderdale, where a group of men blocked his car and the language became something more than words. Conrad was accused of assaulting one of the men with a shoe. He denied it with a line that became famous in certain circles. "I do not hit anyone in the head with a shoe." As a martial artist, he said, he knew easier ways. The line got laughs. It was supposed to, but underneath it was something nobody found amusing. A man who could not walk down a public street without someone deciding to test him. A man whose own fame had made him a target, who had created, through years of perfect performance, a mythology so powerful that strangers felt entitled to confront it. He did not ask for that. None of them ever ask for that. Go back further, to the football field in Chicago, to the boy who sang in the choir and got bullied by teammates who considered it unmasculine. Conrad's response, as he described it decades later, was to hit them harder on the field, every single time, until they stopped. He said, "Every time one of them came after me because I sang in the choir, I practically hit them a little harder." He called himself the toughest singing linebacker they ever met. A boy who loved music, who was punished for loving music, who learned that the only way to protect the thing he loved was to become frightening enough that people stopped trying to take it. 30 years later, the choir singer is gone. The linebacker is all that's left. And the linebacker is trapped on a street in Fort Lauderdale, surrounded by men who want to see if the myth is real. The world did not make room for both. It never does. The record and the truth. Here is something about Robert Conrad that most people do not know. His professional boxing record is 4 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. 4 and 0 and 1. In professional bouts, against real opponents. This is not a detail his publicist invented. This is documented. Conrad competed professionally, and he did not lose. In another era, in another context, this fact would be the headline of the story. The television star who moonlighted as a professional boxer and never got beaten. That is a remarkable thing. But here is what it actually tells us, when you set it beside everything else. A man who sings in a church choir and has 4 professional boxing victories and 0 losses is not a simple man. He is a man living in at least 2 completely separate versions of himself simultaneously. A man who has never been given permission to be just one thing. The world Conrad worked in had no language for that complexity. The television industry of the 1960s needed archetypes. Heroes and villains. The tough man and the soft man. You were one or the other. And Conrad, with his blue eyes and his easy physicality, was cast immediately and permanently in one category. He spent his career trying to demonstrate that the category was too small, that he had more range, more depth, more dimension than any single role could contain. The audience said no. And in the private moments, in the moments that did not make the press releases, Conrad said things that contradicted the entire mythology that had been built around him. He said, "I am too sensitive for a quick affair with a woman. Sex alone would never be enough for me." He said, "Marriage is something that is beyond the flesh." He said these things publicly, on the record, in interviews. A man who says those words is not the man who the audiences thought they were watching on Friday nights. He is someone more complicated, someone who wanted connection and permanence and meaning in his private life, someone who did not enjoy the revolving door that Hollywood offered its male stars as a kind of currency. The persona and the person were living in different houses, and the further they got from each other, the harder it became to find the way back. The Fall. February 2003. Robert Conrad is 68 years old. He is driving on a road in Ojai, California, when his vehicle crosses the center line and collides head-on with another car. He survives. The other driver survives. The injuries Conrad sustains are neurological. The damage affects his right arm and his vocal cords. His right arm, the arm that executed every stunt, the arm that carried 4 professional boxing victories, the arm that the crew of Wild Wild West trusted implicitly for 4 seasons, is paralyzed. He is convicted of driving under the influence. The sentence is 6 months of house arrest, 5 years of probation, counseling, and the loss of his driver's license for 1 year. This is the moment that the easy version of the story calls a downfall. A powerful man brought low by his own choices, a cautionary tale, a chapter ending. But I want to ask a different question. What was Conrad doing in 2003 at 68 years old that led to that night? Not legally, not morally, just humanly. What does a man do when the thing that defined him is gone? When the machine that needed him is running without him? When the audience has moved on to the next version of the same archetype? He spent 4 decades being indispensable, being the one who never flinched, being the one who fell 12 feet and came back to the set 3 months later and did it again. Being the man whose right arm was the most reliable thing on a television soundstage. And then, slowly, the calls stopped. The roles became smaller. The industry that had consumed his youth and his body moved on with the efficiency of all industries that have found a newer model. What is a man supposed to do with that? The Conrad who lifted boxes on the Chicago docks knew who he was. The Conrad who ran from his parents with a girl he loved knew who he was. Even the Conrad who fell 12 feet and refused to stop knew who he was. But the Conrad at 68, who was no longer needed in the way he had been built to be needed, what did he know about himself? Alone in that car, on that road, in a life where the role he had played for decades had quietly been retired. That is not a question with a comfortable answer. The right arm that cannot be moved is a symbol so precise that a novelist would be embarrassed to use it. The instrument of everything he built. The proof of everything he was. The thing that could not be replaced or substituted or protected by anyone else because he had never once allowed anyone else to protect it. Gone. Not taken by a rival, not lost to age the way athletes lose their reflexes. Lost in a moment of ordinary human failure. A night of poor decisions. The kind of thing that happens to people who are not legends. The kind of thing that no mythology prepared him for. The question nobody asked. There is a recording of Robert Conrad, late in his career, being asked about his marriage. He had been married, young. Joan Kenley, the lawyer's daughter he ran away with at 17. They stayed together for 25 years, had 5 children together. The marriage ended in 1977, when Conrad was 42. 25 years in Hollywood. In an industry that runs on novelty and disposability, where the standing joke is that a long marriage is anything past the second film. 25 years. And when he spoke about love, he did not speak like someone who had been through something and moved on. He spoke like someone who still believed in what he had been trying to do. He said he had too good an ego to need multiple women to make him feel like something. He said he was too sensitive for something that ends in the morning with a name you cannot remember. That is not the language of a man who was careless with people. That is the language of a man who wanted one thing deeply and was given instead a world that valued other things from him. Here is what the record shows. Wild Wild West was canceled not because it was failing. It was canceled because it was considered too violent. Too much fighting, too many physical confrontations for a prime-time slot. The most successful thing Conrad ever built was shut down because it had become exactly what the world had asked him to make it. And the one time he tried to build something different, a quieter, more cerebral career, a role that asked for his mind instead of his body, the audience turned away. He could not win. Be too violent, and the censors come. Try to be something more complex, and the audience leaves. He was trapped between what the world made him and what the world would tolerate. Most people do not know what that kind of trap feels like. The trap where your greatest success is also your greatest limitation, where the thing that proved your worth is also the thing that defines your ceiling. But some people do, and those people, if they are watching this, already understand something about Conrad that the rest of the world missed entirely. What was left? Robert Conrad died on February 8, 2020. He was 84 years old. The cause of death was heart failure. He had lived long enough to see the world change around the mythology he had helped create. Long enough to see the kind of masculinity he had embodied in the 1960s become, in some corners, a subject of debate rather than aspiration. Long enough to watch the industry that had run him until something broke quietly move on to other stories, other faces, other archetypes. His professional boxing record remained intact. 4 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. Nobody took that from him. The choir singer from Chicago never made a record that anyone remembers, but the man who sang in that choir remembered it, clearly enough to talk about it in interviews 60 years later. Clearly enough that when he described the bullying, when he described hitting back harder every time someone came after him for being the boy who sang, there was something in the description that was not entirely past tense. It happened a long time ago, but some things never fully stop happening. The most important sentence Robert Conrad ever said publicly was not about boxing or stunts or his years as a television star. It was this: "Marriage is something that is beyond the flesh." That sentence, from the most physically iconic figure in 1960s American television, contains more about the actual human being than anything the publicity department at CBS ever produced. He believed in something beyond performance. He was capable of depth that his career never fully allowed him to show. He was, by his own account, too sensitive for the version of himself that the world demanded he perform. And he performed it anyway, for 50 years. Because the docs in Chicago had taught him the same lesson that every institution teaches the people it needs. Your value here is specific, and it is contingent. And the moment you stop delivering it, you are on your own. Conrad delivered. Until the night in 2003, when the arm that had always delivered could not be moved anymore. And what he had built, the legacy, the record, the mythology, the 300 films and the 4 undefeated boxing bouts and the 178 episodes of a show that America loved and then abandoned. None of it was waiting for him when he got home from that hospital. What was waiting was a quieter life, less driven, less defined by what he could prove. Maybe in some ways, that was the most honest years he ever had. The singing linebacker. Here is the story I keep returning to. A boy in Chicago, probably 14 or 15 years old, stands in the hallway of his school after choir practice. A teammate sees him, maybe laughs, maybe says something about how football players do not sing in church choirs. Maybe shoves him. Conrad does not walk away. He stores it, files it. And then, the next time they are both on a football field, he hits the boy harder than the play requires. He does it again the next time, and the time after that. Not in a way that gets him thrown out of the game, just enough, just precisely enough, so that the boy eventually stops saying anything about the choir. Conrad wins. The choir is protected. He can keep singing. But here is what he loses. Every time he has to do that, every time someone forces him to prove that the softness and the strength can coexist in one body, and the only proof the world accepts is the strength, he moves slightly further from the choir and slightly closer to the linebacker. By the time he is standing on a soundstage in 1965, the choir is still there, somewhere. But you have to look very hard to find it. By the time he is 68, in a car on a California road, you might not find it at all. That is not a story about failure. It is not a story about a man who made wrong choices and paid the price. It is a story about what it costs to spend a lifetime protecting something tender inside yourself by surrounding it with something impenetrable. The impenetrable thing eventually gets people's attention, and the tender thing, the real thing, lives in the shadow of what was built to protect it, quiet and unseen, for as long as it takes. Robert Conrad took that story with him, but he told us enough, in scattered interviews across 5 decades, that we can read it between the lines, if we are paying attention. The man who said he was too sensitive for a quick affair, the man who stayed married for 25 years in an industry that bets against it. The man who wanted to play a lawyer and was told, by the silence of an audience, that they preferred him violent. That man was here. He was real. He did the work of an entire era and left behind a record that nobody will break, and he deserved a world that had more room for him than the one he got. He made the best of the one he had. That will have to be enough. Robert Conrad, born Conrad Robert Falk, Chicago, March 1st, 1935, died February 8th, 2020, age 84, heart failure. Professional boxing record, 4 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. He sang in the choir.